Let's hope this works.
Okay.
All right, I think we are live.
Yes, we are live.
And I am still blurry, which is really cool. What can I use for this? Here, let's use this ice cream carton. Is that going to work? There we go. I'm not blurry anymore. Give people a minute to get in here. Yeah, so Luke, sounded like you kind of had an up and down day at Aaron's today.
Yeah, it could have gone better, but at the same time, Trevor Baumgartner was pretty consistently 10 to 20 pins ahead of me. So on the high end of the house, we had about the same look, and then on the low end of the house, we had about the same look. It's just he's better than I am. So there's that. But
yeah. So at least it is a bit of a yardstick to kind of figure out kind of where you are.
Yes.
And obviously,
yes.
The yardstick is one of the best in the country, so that helps a little bit.
Yeah, so that kind of helps. Still trying to figure out this. That might work. Look at that. Until it falls off, and then I don't. All right.
Yes.
It'll work.
That's my ceiling fan. I haven't figured out how to do a noise gate or something to make it not hum that much. It's kind of annoying, but it also gets really warm in my room otherwise, so there's that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been kind of felt weird for me today, just because I didn't bowl anything. I didn't set foot in the bowling alley.
Weekend, you didn't bowl something.
Yeah, the only bowling related thing I've done today is this stream, and I also did a little bit of work reorganizing my ball pile, which is kind of behind me in my room. So,
okay.
Trying to. Where's my sippy cup? I don't have a sippy cup. I use a beaten up Nalgene water bottle. It's got a sticker on it that says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, except bears, because bears will kill you. So it's got that sticker on it. And then a beaten up storm sticker that I should probably replace. So no sippy cup here. I drink a lot of water. So it works
Angel
out.
found a cup, Bass Pro Shop or something like that. Angel found a cup at Bass Pro Shop that says something like, the early bird can have the worm because worms are gross and mornings are stupid.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know what? I'm going to try turning this fan down a little bit. This is bothering me. Give me a sec.
All right.
All right, I decided to say heck the fan, and I'll probably bake a little bit in here, but it's whatever. So, all right, got a few people in here. It's 8:05. I guess we can go on ahead and get started. So, the kind of my thought here, Luke, and I know we've talked a little bit about this, just kind of set the table a little bit, is you with your change to bowling lefty. And me with kind of the new level of experience that I've gained, both from bowling tournaments here and kind of getting out and seeing more patterns in different centers, but also the adventures of Kansas City, shall we say. It's definitely been a big change in perspective for both of us. And so I guess, can you kind of talk a little bit? I know you touched on it a minute ago, but I know that the metagame on the left side you found to be quite different from the right side. And I guess kind of how is that, I guess first kind of talk about what you've noticed, what you've seen, and kind of how you notice your perspectives and strategies changing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. On the right side, it's very much a transition-based game. I mean, you only have true fresh for practice and about halfway through the first game. Now, after that, you kind of have to pay attention to who's ahead of you and make moves based on the changes that the lanes are going through. On the left side, I've found that, number one, the lane play is a little bit different. There's no track on the left side. Ball reaction at the end of the pattern seems to be a little bit sharper. But I've also noticed here recently, now that I've at least gotten a handle on a little bit better consistency and being able to make better shots, and also watching a lot of Trevor, I figured out that the left side, you have to be faster to make ball changes, and that's not something that I've been terribly comfortable with, especially on the right side. Is if I have the look with a certain ball and it's working, generally I will just move with that ball. Now on the left side of the lane, transition doesn't happen fast enough really. So as soon as you lose the look with a ball, you can make certain physical changes, but Trevor will often go through 3 or 4 balls in a night, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, it's the left side of the lane. Stuff doesn't really change that fast, so are we just trying to be, I don't know, are we just trying to be a hipster here, or what are we doing?
Yeah.
But no, it's actually a thing. As soon as you start getting tapped, the transition just doesn't really move fast enough. It's better to change balls than to try to make little adjustments, because I found myself trapped the last couple of weeks. As soon as I kind of start leaving flat sevens or the ball starts sneaking up, I'll try to make adjustments, but it just doesn't work out for some reason. I keep chasing it and thinking, okay, well, it's not changing that much. I should be able to make a tiny little adjustment and dial right back into it. But based on how the differences in the left side and the right sides of the lane, I don't really have a track to work with. And so as soon as you start moving in a little bit, your angles can get steep, or if you start leaving flat sevens, you can't exactly just slow your speed down a little bit. So
Yeah.
I figured out that just making the ball change, a ball change equals transition on the left side of the lane.
So essentially, you're almost trying to get ahead of the transition, or like ignore it entirely by playing the lanes a little differently with that ball change. Is that kind of almost a way to think about it?
Yeah, that's the idea, is to create your own transition with a ball change. So
Yeah.
like I had 520 going in the other night in the league with the idle synergy, and then I started if I got a little bit slow, the ball would go through the nose. If I kept throwing it the same speed, I started leaving flat sevens, so I was losing a little bit of back end reaction, and I tried to keep making changes. I tried to keep making adjustments. Oh, hello. I tried to keep making adjustments, and I had the thought in the back of my head, it's like, you know what, if I went to the UC2, then I wouldn't have to worry about the kind of over-under thing. But I kept trying, and like, it's just a small thing. If I make a little adjustment, if I just slow my ball speed down, or if I just slow my ball speed down or make a little bit of adjustment, I should be able to dial back in and we should be fine. But it just never was fine the rest of the night, and I ended up shooting 170 and for 590, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, I don't want to be one of those people that just, as soon as I don't strike for a couple frames, I just go grab another ball, because that seems stupid. But Trevor does it all the time, and he averages 240 everywhere, and if he's lost, it's just bad. But generally speaking, I've been able to kind of watch him, and if I feel like I'm in kind of the same zone or the same spot or seeing the same things or whatever else, but he just is so much quicker than I am to change balls. And on the right side of the lane, it's like, I have a good look, I make a small adjustment, we're back in business. It just doesn't seem to work that way on the left side of the lane.
Yeah. Well, and even on the right side, I think that's one thing that kind of corresponds. And I've been watching a lot of Dylan Burns recently, just to kind of for a similar reason, because he's so good on the right side of the lane in so many different situations. You look at how he's playing things, and he'll see like, or even when you bowled the PTQ and you crossed with Matt Ogle, I remember you commented how, like, he'd move to a new pair, he'd throw one shot that reads a little bit early in 4 pins. Next thing you know, he's 2 balls down and 2 zones left, and you're like, wait, what just happened? So it's kind of that
instantly.
Yeah, it's that it's the same skill set, just applied a little differently, I think, for your side of the lane, is knowing that it's not just to take, try and nickel and dime yourself for adjustments, but to make the decisive move that you need to make to start striking again. And that's hard to do sometimes. It's like, it's kind of, if you stay in what you got, then you're probably going to shoot 2-0, 2-10, but you're not going to split a bunch, or at least hopefully not. Versus if you make the decisive move, you're almost kind of swinging for the fences, so it's almost like a calculated risk you have to take.
And Trevor actually did that the last game today. We were on the high end of the house, and he went 220, 240 or something like that, and he bounced down to the low end of the house, and all of a sudden the look completely, they were hooking so much more on the low end of the house, and he shot 170 that game.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere, the two lanes were pretty different, and so the next game he kind of scraped out he changed some things in the middle of that third game, and then the fourth game he just kind of scraped out a 2-0, and so we're talking about being on this pattern where after 2 games, all 3 of it, me and Dylan and Trevor, were all in the top 5. I was a plus 60, they were at like plus 70, plus 80.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go down to the low end of the house, and it's like we're in a different building.
Yeah.
And he shot 170, Dylan shot 170, and then he scraped together a 2-0 the next game, and then I think he shot 220 the next game, and the last game he was looking at needing a big one to get into the top 4 for the step ladder, and so he just made a bigger change, and he's like I told Dylan, I can shoot 220 doing what I'm doing right now, but that's not going to get me in the cut, so I need to do something big this game or whatever. So he kind of swung for the fences, ended up shooting 2-0, but 2-0 wasn't really terribly different from 220 again. He needed 260.
Yeah.
And so he made the move, and it didn't quite work out, but it didn't work out for me either, because I was crossing right next to him. I also shot 2-0. So it was weird with what the house was doing, and just that's the other thing is that I was talking to him about on the right side of the lane, when I would always hear people talking about, okay, well, this lane hooks more than this lane, or this pair hooks a little bit more in general, or this pair's a little bit tighter, or whatever else. And I'm always wondering, on the right side of the lane, how do you tell what's the lane and what is transition? You have to bowl on the right side. You have to bowl on those lanes so much more often and so many different stages of transition to actually tell what the lanes are doing. On the left side of the lane, that's all taken. Transition just taken out of the equation. So
yeah, it's literally what transition? What is transition?
Yeah, so that's taken completely out of the equation. So I can tell instantly what is that particular lane, that particular pair, and so I get a whole lot better idea what is playing, how it's playing.
Yeah.
Based on, it's not going to be the pattern, because it's not going to be transition, so it has to be the lane. And so when we're bowling literally right next to each other, it was a whole lot easier for me to gauge throughout the day. Okay, we both had big games on the high end, we flipped to the low end, 2 games suck, and the next 2 games are basically identical. We both shot 223 the 5th game, and we both shot 2-0 the last game. So
Luke might be dead, which is unfortunate. Maybe. All right. Well, apologies. We got some. There we go. You cut out for a sec, Luke.
Yeah. We're going through
rural Kansas where there's not.
Yeah, we're in Kansas. That's
fair enough. Yeah, that is a good point. And this is something I've tried to do as well, as understanding the scoring pace of kind of where you are in the field and where you are in the house. Is like there are times where 690 for 3 might be really good if you can, or shoot a 230 might be really good. Or it might be really bad, even on the same pattern in the same center. It just kind of depends on where you are in the block, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and at a certain point, if you know that certain pairs are tough, and everybody's going to struggle on them, then that gives you a little bit better sense of what's really going on. If you think, well, God, I just had a rough game and I fell out of the cut or whatever, but you're on a certain pair or a certain end of the house, it's like the low end of the East. If you can scrape out a couple of 200 games down there, then you're going to end up getting it back either on the higher end or once you get back towards the middle of the house. So just because you fell out of the cut for a couple of games on a bad side of the house doesn't really mean much. It's got to kind of keep things more in focus or more in context, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I guess kind of talking about the story side of things of this conversation is you've had the transition, going over to the left side, and I think there's been a lot of transitions for me, and I know that I've been endlessly mocked, shall we say, on Rise and Grinds about this. Is that it used to be I just walk in and stand left and you eat the ball at the 10 pin and watch it curve back and destroy pins. And that was a lot of fun, and that works in a lot of places where I bowl here in North Carolina. That doesn't really work so well out in Kansas City, and so it's been kind of that same type of discovery of a different way of thinking about transition management. Just obviously the context is completely different because right hand versus left hand. So for me, it's been more like, I don't know, I'm almost, as strange as this sounds, I'm trying to do less in every single part of my game. Trying to work less physically, let gravity and just a free swing do the work for me, not try and knock the holes out of the ball.
Yeah.
But then the interesting thing that I've noticed from this as well is I don't think as much. Like I'm able to use simpler shapes and still strike, and so then that makes I think I'm getting closer to where you were on the right side, where it's kind of, you're in a ball and you just kind of figure out how to make it work through transition for several games, and that's not necessarily, that's a great skill to have on the right side of the lane.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of segues into one of the big things you and I have been talking about a lot recently, which is kind of where this live stream is coming from, and kind of the whole part of kind of what I wanted to talk about as well is, I know that the theories of like what balls we're drilling and what we're throwing have changed somewhat. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you can get caught up. I think I was talking about this with Jonathan on the stream yesterday, is that one of the big benefits of being a staffer is being able to drill. We drill so many balls, we go through so much stuff, and so we get a good familiarity with the covers and the cores, and we find out what works for us and what doesn't work for us. I think I mentioned that if anything comes out with a spec cover on it, instantly this is probably not going to go well.
For
I know
me,
instantly. It's like, So we get a pretty good familiarity with ball reaction, what works for us. The problem is that when we go to a tournament and we have 30 balls laying on the ground and we're thinking, okay, well, on paper, I want to cover this angle, I want to cover this angle, I want to cover this slot, I want to whatever else. But when you actually get to the tournament and you start bowling, it's like, well, that shape doesn't really look that great for me, or this doesn't look that great, and so you end up looking at, the 15 balls that you brought, and only 15 or only half of them you're even considering throwing, because it's like, well, this one's this or this one's that, and you don't really realize it until you get to the tournament that like half of the stuff that you brought is just not really that great of a fit for you to begin with.
Yeah, they end up being filler balls.
Yeah, they made sense on paper. They sounded good. You were covering bases, but when push comes to shove, they're not really going to look that great out on the lane. And so I've gotten tired of the ball shuffling and just thought, you know what, I just want to knock pins down. It's really fun looking at a bunch of stuff in the stash saying, God, I really like to drill that, or I really like throwing this ball, I'd like to throw this more, and you end up paying more attention to what you want to throw than what you should throw. And so I've really boiled it down here recently, and that just means leaving a bunch of stuff in the bags on the floor in the bag, and leaving a bunch of new stuff in boxes. Like I keep looking at that pink IQ, and I'm like, I have to drill this ball. And then we have promotion tours, and we have all this other stuff, and I'm like, man, I really want to drill this stuff so bad, but do I need it? Because I'm still
look. I'm happy to help you out with one of those promotion tours if you need it. Just saying.
Yeah. But man, I keep looking at stuff in the bags on the floor. Like I've got my phase 0 that looks really good for me. I've got my astrophysics, which I haven't taken anywhere in months. I have my phase 2 and my phase 3 that I really like throwing, but they just don't make the bag over this other stuff. And if I was thinking from, gosh, I really like to throw this ball, and so I'm just going to take a couple of these balls out of the bag for a couple of weeks and then try to throw something that doesn't necessarily work out as well as something else, then I'm losing pins. And I don't need any help losing pins. All I have to do is leave a 7 pin. I leave a 7 pin and I'm losing pins.
So let me ask this: Have you gotten to the point where you're just hitting re-rack when you 7 pin at this point, or are we not quite there yet?
They frown on that in league and in tournaments.
Really? Go figure.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Go figure. I was telling somebody about that today. I'm like, this is why I bowl on YouTube, because I can just hit re-rack and delete that shot later. I don't. They kind of frown on that when you just, that was a 7 pin. We'll just fix that right here.
Yeah.
Play 9 pin no tap.
I mean, that sounds great to me. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but since I've taken that attitude, and even though I continue to get better from a lefty point of view, I think a big part of that is simplifying everything and going with reactions that I'm comfortable with, instead of taking something I want to throw, taking something that I know that I'm comfortable with, taking something that I know that I like. And so I think that simplified the game enough that my scores have gone up, and my feel, my comfort level, everything has gotten better as a result of just simplifying what I'm doing.
Yeah. Jeremy in the chat, by the way, is offering to shoot your 7 pins for you. So
that would be amazing.
Yeah, y'all should probably make sure that's kosher, but that might be a good strategy for Thursday nights for you.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think I've missed about 35 of them this year, and I think we're 25 weeks in, so.
Oops.
We discussed this, that we were going to set it up to where I shoot all your spares.
Yeah, Angel can shoot my spares. I'm just going to give the tap in to or I guess I'll tap the other arm.
Yeah. Tag her in.
To bring the righty in to shoot that spare for me.
I like that idea. Yeah, I think kind of what you're saying is, it's interesting that you and I have both kind of been on this journey at the same time, just kind of, again, from the other side of the lane. Is, I was looking at my usage, kind of my usage rates. I track all my games on per ball in a spreadsheet, and it's like, I don't have the image in front of it. It was something like, I've bowled 250 games since the start of January, and it's like 200 of those are with a phase 2, an IQ2 or solid, an all road, a Zen, and a Hustle Inc. And maybe like a UC2 in there as well. But it's like, my bag is getting more boring by the day almost, it feels like. But it's kind of that same perspective shift. And I think that's all, like, it's weird, but like, I don't really want to drill a whole lot of stuff right now. I've got a couple balls on the way that I want to give another crack to, namely an Axiom and another Synergy, but those are both just because I think the layouts I had previously didn't quite do the ball justice, and I can see enough in the shapes that I think they might have some value for me. But I guess we can segue a little bit here into talking about some of the new releases, but you see, seeing video and then hearing like what you and Angel are saying about stuff, the new stuff that's come out. What's come out this year? The High Rev Max, the Reality.
The Reality.
Then the Insight, and what was the other one? The Parallax Effect.
Yeah, the Effect is the most recent one.
Yeah, this is something I've it took a lot of trial and error to get here, but I think I'm starting to get better at looking at a ball and honestly saying, is this going to be something I will actually use, or is this just something that looks fun that I'll drill and throw for 15 games, and then it'll sit in a box in my room and never see the light of day again?
Yeah.
So I guess it's kind of been a similar journey on my side, but I guess let's kind of talk just briefly about kind of our various impressions of the balls so far that have come out this year. So I guess let's start with the High Rev Max. I know you've done some testing with it after your video. I don't think it's one that's made your main bag though. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the High Road Max is something that we kind of knew was going to work out well for Angel, because she's gotten along with NEX the entire time. So just from a cover stock level, the Axioms look really good for her. The Axiom Pearls look really good for her. She likes her Proton. It's just too strong.
Yeah.
And she likes anything high road, because with their slower speed, the core doesn't wind up quite as quick, and so it gets a little bit further down the lane. And then the high roads kind of have that, most of them have that kind of round archy shape to them, so they're nothing that's going to go nuts. They get a little bit further down the lane, and then they kind of walk right up, and so pretty well anything high road looks good for her, and she's like the NEX cover, and so that just seemed like, okay, this is going to work. I haven't liked anything with the NEX cover on it. The Axiom looks okay, but my biggest problem with it is that it just shapes too much for how much it hooks. And having a bunch of hook on the left side is fine. Having a bunch of shape is a different story, and having them both at the same time kind of throws things out of the equation. I didn't think I was going to be able to throw the Synergy. I didn't think I was going to be able to throw the UC2, but because they don't... losing it again. But because they don't hook off the planet,
yeah,
the UC2 and the Synergy get... Okay. All right, yeah. We're
all aboard the struggle bus.
Yep. All right. Now we should be okay.
Awesome.
But because they are so clean up front, they get down the lane so well, that allows me to be softer with my hand without just chucking it.
Essentially letting the ball create the shape, and then you just kind of get out of it, essentially.
Yeah, so I just have to get out of it, and it floats. They both float for 30 or 40 feet effortlessly without doing anything or winding up, and so I can just float out of them and get a bunch of free length. So I can just be softer with them at the bottom. Now, with something like the High Road Max, that cover is so strong that it still wants to hook. It still wants to be early. It still wants to go. And so when it gets to the spot, it's both hooking and then it wants to take off too. And so
that's just a bad combination on that side of the lane.
It's just a bad combination. And I threw the Proton in League on Friday because those the lanes that we bowl out on Friday are really slow down lane. And so I thought, well, NEX is going to dig through this, and it did dig through it. But I drove by 4/8, and if I got slow or got the ball inside at all, it just took off.
Yeah.
And so I still shot 680, but it was a very mediocre, kind of frustrating 680 that if I would just thrown another ball, it probably would have gone better.
Yeah.
But I think that for the high road, it does help a lot with the core getting further down the lane, but it still wants to be boomy. But the high road core still wants to go long. And so if I'm too straight with it, it wants to take off. If I get in just a little bit, it wants to shoot past the spot. And that's just further, the problem is just further compounded by the fact that on the left side, you don't really have a track to work with. And so you're not getting any help from the lanes with either friction, traction, or blend. And so if you have any kind of layout, or if you have any kind of ball reaction, or whatever you have about ball reaction is kind of exaggerated on the left side of the lane. So if it's clean up front, it's going to be even cleaner. If it's boomy on the back end, it's going to be even boomier. Yeah. So that's just kind of the story with that. So the High Road Max, I tried it today, but it was just too much ball. So it just hasn't really fit. The Proton is decent, but it just doesn't really fit. The Axiom's good, but it just doesn't really fit, or at least not better than stuff that I've already got in the bag.
Yeah, and I think that is you touched on some good points I definitely agree with there. For me, I've definitely enjoyed throwing the High Road Max. I think the all road that we drilled on the drilling stream when I was out there for New Year's, I think that ball the timing of that followed closely by the High Road Max coming out. I think that I've learned a lot from throwing those two balls. But the Max is still almost, you mentioned how it's a little too much shape for how much it hooks, or like the combination of hook plus shape is almost borderline too much. And I kind of feel that some with the Max as well, even on my side of the lane, is the shape feels very similar to the all-road that I've been carrying a lot recently, but just that little bit of extra hook kind of forces me into some weird angles sometimes, and trying to stay away from that. It's a very good ball. I know I saw several guys, including I saw Sean Rash using it quite a bit at the Tournament of Champions this week. And I mean, it wouldn't shock me if we see it on the show on Sunday, honestly, because that seems like a ball roll he's really matching up well with. But it is that same thing of it is close, but I don't know, I almost see some better options in my bag. right now at least. So another ball, and I don't think you. I know I haven't drilled one. I don't think you have either. The Reality came out, I believe, at the same time as the High Road Max. It looks really good, and I've seen a lot
Yeah.
of adoption from it, adoption of it on the tour. I believe
Yeah.
Simonson used that quite a bit during the final round, or during the seeding round, and I think possibly even on the show of the. Or no, he used a trend on on both of the shows, but he used the Reality for the seeding round. So it looks kind of almost Alpha Crux-ish, but stronger. Is kind of the vibe I get from it. I don't know. Have you seen it used very much?
Yeah. And I was going to say that it looks like a slightly weaker Proton, but since a Proton looks like a really strong Alpha Crux,
Yeah.
the shape...
Tomato.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The shape is very generally similar. I still haven't figured out... I was talking with Jonathan on my stream yesterday about this, is that the global covers are a little bit harder to read because they just have the number as far as the overall strength.
Yeah.
So whether S77 or S84 or whatever they use, it's just a number for the strength of the cover, but not knowing the exact formula of the cover makes it a little bit trickier to read or to understand without actually throwing it in comparison to some of the other stuff. So, but generally it's looked pretty good for a lot of people. And if it's a little bit stronger Alpha Crux, a little bit weaker Proton physics, it just looks good for everybody that's thrown it. And so It's not something I'm going to go out of my way to get, because it's just, I'm not going to throw something that strong very often. And so it looks good, but it's not going to make the bag over something else probably.
Yeah, and that's kind of that's almost the feeling I have as well with that ball. Is it looks really good, but I have an RST that looks really, really good too. And yes, I know they're not the exact same ball, but they're close enough that, you know, even if I'm building out an 8 or 9 ball bag to take to Kansas City for a weekend, I'm not going to take 2 big ASIMs like that. Like there's other shapes that take priority over that, and so that's kind of a balancing act there. The next 2 we're going to talk about, I think, are kind of a little more touching on one of the other themes of this stream. This is kind of the direction of my channel, is the Insight and then the Parallax effect. The Insight, it came out, and then the Omega Crux is discontinued a few weeks later, and I think you called this even before you drilled it, was that the Insight was going to be another kind of Omega Crux type ball. So I guess, I know you've thrown it some. Can you talk about your experiences a little bit with that one?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that I tried to make it very clear in my review, because sometimes if I say, well, this ball feels like another ball, or there's overlap, or it's whatever else, it's not a commentary on the quality of the ball. It felt like when the Insight came out, it overlapped so many other different balls that it's like, okay, well, if I'm in a certain situation, I'm either going to be throwing the Omega or the RST or the Rubicon, and it just overlaps like crazy with all of those. Now, the thing with it is that from outside of Third Arrow, it feels very Omega Cruxy, but obviously, and even on my video, and a lot of other people have said, well, once you start, and, you know, Hank Scorpio, that's in my Discord, he said, yeah, when I start getting deeper, it winds up so much more, and it's kind of like a more versatile Omega Crux, because it looks very similar outside of Third Arrow, but as soon as you start getting in, the Omega still wants to be really slow, and it wants to be really blendy. The Insight will actually wind up and turn the corner, but it's got it's slightly cleaner cover. It's a very strong cover, but it's slightly cleaner cover. But the way that the Omega Crux core is designed is for most regular standard, I guess, pinup layouts, you're not really getting that far into the core with the thumb hole, whereas on the Insight you are. And so by the time you get to the post-drill numbers, the Insight and Omega Crux are going to be a lot closer after drilling than they are before drilling.
Yeah.
So you end up having a somewhat similar look on the lanes, and it makes sense now that the Omega Crux is gone, to kind of have that replacement, and now it slots into things a lot better.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But I actually like the ball. I like the ball. It just overlapped with some stuff. And again, now that the Omega's gone, it overlaps with fewer things. And I took it today. It didn't make it out of the bag, but once I got the High Road Max out of the bag, and that was too much ball, and then I tried my 2-inch pin MVP Attitude. That was too much ball, and so I'm like, I'm not even getting
That
it
just
out.
kind of that just kind of blocked it out completely for you at that point, which
Yeah,
totally
at
makes
that
sense.
point-
And that's the point of an arsenal too. Is
Yeah.
it's like I walk into thinking back to say the scratch singles we bowled New Year's Day. So I walked in with 9 bowling balls, and I think 8 shots into practice, I knew that 5 of them were never going to be thrown for the entire day.
Yeah.
And that's something else that I think kind of comes with experience. So I guess, and I think this is something that will probably come up as we kind of dig into this topic a little more, and probably get some questions about this later on. How do you, I guess, kind of as you learn, like how do you think about, and what are you looking for to figure out, like, is this a ball that, for someone who's shopping for a ball, how do you kind of narrow it down to, like, is this something I should be interested in? Or in the case of, like, me and the insight is I had an Omega Crux. I liked it, but it never was really in window to make sense to use, and so I ended up getting rid of it. And then I see another insight, so obviously that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But more generally, like, how do you suggest people kind of go about cultivating that, and I guess being more savvy shoppers, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to shapes and what zones they like to play on the lane. Because if you take something, like I said, that like the Omega and the Insight that are very similar from outside of third arrow, but they get quite a bit different once you get deeper on the lane. It's like the Idle Pearl and the Trend, where they're very similar from straighter angles, but as you start getting deeper, the Idle Pearl kind of resists bending, where the Trend doesn't really have a problem with it. If you have the amount of friction there to make it actually go. And so if somebody's like, well, I play straighter on the lane, or I play straighter on the lane and I like these types of balls, it's like, well, this one's probably going to work for you, this one's probably not going to work for you. Or so at that point I can suggest, okay, well, Omega Crux or Insight, flip a coin. But if they're like, well, I generally play third or fourth arrow, then all of a sudden the Insight gets a big advantage over the Omega Crux, or I would recommend the Trend over the Idle Pearl.
Yeah.
And so I try to pay attention to friction responses, shapes, just general shapes. If somebody says, okay, well, I like the ProMotion, I like the IQ Tour, I like the Hustle Link, and so right away that's putting, okay, they like their ball rather than like Shim. So feel more comfortable recommending something like an RST that's got a very kind of those are the things I generally pay attention to.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's definitely good advice too, is to kind of, I guess, for individual bowlers, is to be able to even kind of cultivate, some of that, being able to kind of train, essentially eye training, of being able to look at what your ball is doing and understand that in the context of what other people's balls are doing, understand why, understand how to manipulate it. But then as you build that, that's also going to kind of, essentially, the more you can build out the mental library, so to speak, of knowing how you manage the lane and knowing how your equipment responds to different situations, I think that can help a lot with both decision making in the moment, as well as being a more educated shopper, which I know this is something I'm kind of working towards on my own channel, is trying to make it not just a ball review channel, but make it more educational. I've got a series in the works that'll be kind of talking through some of my preparations and what I'm going to be looking at as I get ready to go to nationals in June and July. So stuff like that is, and I think you've done a very good job of this as well. Kind of obviously coming at it from a slightly different angle than me, but teaching people about bowling, not just teaching them about the newest ball that's out there.
Yeah, and that's something I've said a lot here recently, is eventually it's nice to talk about bowling balls and understand all that and layouts and surfaces and whatever else, but eventually you have to get out of the pro shop and actually go bowl on the lane, and then that creates a whole other because again, we can talk about what's great on paper or what we think we should take for this certain pattern, but then you have to take lane surface into account. You have to take how you throw the ball. This is something else that I was explaining the other day, is that if I have a ball that hooks too much for me, it might be just perfect for you because you've got a different physical game.
Yeah.
If something's a little bit too sharp for me, it might be a whole lot rounder and smoother for you because you're, the harder you throw the ball, the more you're going to straighten out ball reaction. It's not going to hook as early. It's not going to boing as much off the dry. And so, shapes can even look quite a bit different for you versus for me. So something that's, again, too sharp for me might be fairly smooth for you. So there's a whole lot more that goes into it than just talking about stuff on paper.
As much as I would like for this to be true, and as much as I'm sure some other people would as well, bowling is not done in a laboratory scientifically on paper. And that's something that I think it's been reinforced for me with the trips I've made out to Kansas City. Is I can game plan all I want for I can game plan in theory all I want for certain situations and such, but at the end of the day, it comes down to having tools that I'm comfortable with in my hand, so that I can then make the adjustments needed with those tools to be able to knock pins down. Because that's sure, having a cool jersey and all the latest gear, that's fun, but bowling's a game of knocking pins down. That's what it's all about. So, did have a question in the chat. John Schaefer was wondering, Luke, did you ever get around to drilling another Axiom Pearl? And I think this kind of dovetails on that, what we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's one of those things I'd like to, because I think that it could be very useful. But at the same time, I have other stuff that I'm more comfortable with, or if I am finding myself in a situation where I'm going to be using that type of reaction, I'm probably going to be using something else that I'm already more comfortable with, which sucks. And every time I make a 6-ball league arsenal, or even if I make like an 8-ball or something like that, people are like, oh, well, what about this ball? Or no love for this ball, or whatever else. It's like, no, I really like that one. It just doesn't make the bag.
Yeah.
One recently that I really, really like that's just not making it in is the RST. I think I'm going to... The Proton got its shot on Friday. It's just too much ball. It's just too much ball. I can't ever throw it on anything. And I might take it to Nationals for the doubles and singles shot. It might look really good there because it looked really good at Gauge. And so that might fit in there. But beyond that...
Yeah. Well, keep in mind we are bowling doubles singles in the bowling center, not the bowling plaza this year. So there is a
there's also going to be only one when we're doing the team bowling. There's only going to be one team per lane. So that's
so weird.
One team per pair. That's what.
Yeah.
But so that could be something interesting to talk about there as far as transition. The righties are going to get kind of a lefty experience.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. John Hawes just joined up and said North Rock hooked off the planet today, so I guess they used up all the oil when you bowled for Southwest.
Yeah, they must have. They must not have run the lane since. Because Dylan and Trevor bowled the weekend that I bowled it, and they had the same issues. Like, it just wouldn't hook, and everybody told them the week before, it's like, okay, well, they're hooking off the planet, and there's all kinds of scores, and then we bowled, got the opposite experience, and apparently they're back to hooking this weekend. So
well, it's a conspiracy. That's what I'm learning here.
Yeah.
So.
Charles Clark asked, how different is the reaction of a bowling ball once it's plugged? I think that kind of depends a little bit on how much you're changing the layout. And I guess I know Storm's got some really good videos and articles over on their side, kind of talking about the effects of when you drill a bowling ball. And so then, and I know you've seen this a little bit because I think you've changed a few balls from righty to lefty. That you had previously. Have you noticed a difference with those in any layout changes you're making, or how's that kind of worked out for you?
Not a ton, and I think that you to be able to establish kind of an idea about that, you have to have a fresh ball of like the best way to do it is take 2 fresh balls, drill one, plug one, change the layout, and then you have to do so much. You have to have a standard.
You have to work a lot to remove confounding variables, essentially, kind of establish a baseline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so as soon as you plug something to, you're going to resurface it to smooth it off, and factory surface is always different from surface after the fact, and there's just too many variables to actually lock it down. And I think that what you were talking about with bowling not being as mathematical, it's so confusing, and there's so much experience that goes into it, and there's so many variables with it that people will instinctively try to simplify it or make it as simple as possible and try to make it mathematic, but you really can't do that.
That's me. That was what I meant.
Yeah. But it's such a. But everybody kind of gets to that point. It's like, well, I'm going to lock down this layout, or I'm going to get this specific surface down, or when people ask for layouts or surfaces, or I'm going to go bowl on this pattern, what should I take and what surface should it be at, and whatever else. It's like, well, you're not going to know until you get out there and bowl on it. And even if you bowl in the same center repeatedly, you have to figure out sometimes it just doesn't act like it's supposed to act. And so you have to kind of go off experience and do some things on the fly. And
does the ball you're plugging have anything to do with it?
In the ball that you're plugging, yeah, that's a good point that Angel just brought up. The ball that you're plugging has something to do with it, because if you're plugging and re-drilling a pitch black, or something that's like 257, 021, or 015, or whatever it is, you don't have a whole lot of core to work with in the first place. Or if you're plugging and re-drilling an IQ or a hustle, it's like, well, there's not really a whole bunch to change in the first place.
Versus contrast that like a proton physics, for example, it's a lot more dynamics, and you're essentially, the way I've always thought of it, and at least this goes for personal experiences, it's almost like the more you plug and re-drill a ball, the more you're kind of dulling, the more you're muting what the core actually does on lane. But that's just kind of repeated layout changes over times.
She's saying you could. We could also get Fruit on here to talk about that, because he's the expert on plug balls, even multiple times.
Yes, that is very true.
I have plugged a couple and re-drilled them, and I haven't really found any meaningful change, I suspect. But at the same time, plugging from righty going to lefty. But
I used to take some of your old stuff though too.
Yeah, I've plugged and re-drilled some stuff before on the right side, and I really can't tell a measurable difference. I don't think it makes. Again, I think it's one of those things that on paper makes a lot bigger difference than it does actually, the actual effect. But at the same time, you're not going to notice things as much the lower of an average you are. Like if you have a 170 average bowler and you take and plug something and re-drill it, and they can swear up and down that it feels different, but it's like, well, you average 170, so you're not really consistent enough to get a good read on anything to begin with.
Yeah, it's like Jeremy just jumped in the chat and said, nobody's a robot. You're not always going to throw the ball the same, even day to day. So that totally makes sense.
Yeah, and even then, when people say, oh, the lanes are different this week than they were last week, but I can still tell that this ball's different from, like, well, if the lanes are different, then how can you tell that the ball is different?
Yeah.
Like, if you swear that this is, the lanes are different every week, but I can tell this or I can tell that or whatever else, it's like, well, if the lanes are different, the ball's going to act differently. And yeah, that Angel said another thing too. You also bowl different people every week, so transition's going to be different every week. And so there's, again, people don't consider the amount of variables that are changing from week to week, day to day, whatever else. You could get a new batch of lane oil in, and there's been several times where they've talked about, well, the centers pay a lot of attention to scoring, and so if they get a new batch of lane oil in and all of a sudden the scores across the house go up, and you're only going to see what's going on from week to week. But if the scores across the house go up for a couple weeks, well, they're going to call back and say, okay, well, this new batch of lane oil is great. Give me the rest of this specific, this particular specific batch that you got. So,
yeah,
And then if it's cold outside or if it's warm outside, or there's so many different things that go into it that it's just impossible to lock it down.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's something that's shifted in my mentality, and I've noticed this, especially coming out to Kansas City, is not really, as strange as this may sound, it's almost like ignoring all of the little things and not worrying so much about what should be, but rather just kind of figuring out what is. Because that kind of gets back to the overall concept of, bowling is done on the lanes, not in a lab. Is if you focus on what should be, then you're going to get bogged down in like, oh, this is a long pattern, not a ton of volume. I shouldn't need a big cover with a lot of surface on it. Then if you look at what is, let's think back to the Hangover singles at Olathe on New Year's weekend. Is I tried to play right, trying to play up the track, keep it in front of me, not do nothing crazy, and I bowled minus 3 bajillion, I think, give or take a few pins for the first 4 games, and it's like nothing was working. And then I'm finally like, all right, screw it, let's just go to 5th arrow and slow hook a big ball and see what happens. And then I went plus 80 for the next 3. So it's kind of, it's almost, and I've noticed it kind of when I feel myself getting bogged down, even shot to shot of what should be, then I kind of fall out of my process a little bit, to steal a phrase from Kyle Troop on the TV shows the last few weeks. And the process isn't what should be. The process is what is. What is, and what do I do to work with what is to get the best results I can. And there are days where that's not there, and there are days where it is, and it's been a change in mentality of almost trying to hit it when I match up with what is, and when I don't, then learn how to see what I can learn for next time, essentially.
Yeah, and that happened today to a certain extent, is that we had a nice little look, just kind of walking it in right up 5 with urethane, and then we get down to the lower end of the house, and it's hooking off the planet. And instead of just throwing a couple shots and saying, oh crap, this is hooking, and making the instant adjustment, it's like, well, we're lefties, there's no transition. What the hell's going on here? And I just kind of camped out in the same spot and tried to throw a little bit harder or hook a little bit less, and the angles got off. Instead of just, okay, well, they're hooking, so I'm just going to make a couple board move. I got caught up in, well, this should be, I found the look, this should be the same, or on the same pattern in the same building. So instead of just kind of taking it for what it was, it's like, well, no, this should not be like this. This is stupid.
Yeah.
And just fighting it for 2 solid games and ending up missing the cut because I'm an idiot.
Yeah, well,
So,
I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt in terms of missing the cut because I'm an idiot. So. What else was I wanted to pick your brain? Oh yeah, we didn't talk much about the parallax effect, and this is one for those that are in Luke's Discord server. I don't really think I need to re-explain how I feel about the original parallax. I think everybody and their mom, second cousin, and pet gerbil knows that already. So the parallax effect did kind of scare me off a little bit, just because seeing the name again, and it does. Kind of from what I've seen, it makes sense for kind of what I expected from the ball, but I know you and Angel have both thrown it, so can you talk a little bit about your experiences with that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I like the parallax, but it's a lot smoother motion, and so a lot of the stuff that I tend to like, I think the only thing that the only ball that we really overlap on is the IQ Tour Solid. I like mine. I don't throw it as much as you do, but I really like it. You really like yours. But
interesting sidebar, just if I can butt in, is now that my All Road has gotten some games on it, that's actually taken the place of my IQ Solid in my grab and go really core bag that I take around with me. Because it gives me that kind of little bit of a different feel from the lower RG cores of stuff like a Phase 2 or an IQ 2 or Solid or an Axiom.
Whether to apologize or say you're welcome.
Why not both?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's been kind of an interesting thing I've noticed, is that I am trending a little more in that direction. The IQ Solid is still really good, but
yeah, but
I do kind of miss it sometimes. But the skill set of the all roads is something a little bit different. But I do also think that the all road for me is almost what you get out of the pro motion for you in terms of usage windows and shapes and lane play. So, anyways, sidebar notwithstanding, back to the parallax effect.
Yeah. Anyway, I like the parallax because it's a smoother reaction. I generally trend towards smoother reactions outside of something like a Synergy or a UC2. But if it's stronger, generally I'm going to need it to be smoother. And so I was kind of excited for the parallax effect, and then all of a sudden, it's got way too much NEX in it. It feels like. And I don't know, there's a fairly large difference between the parallax and the parallax effect, and it feels like that same NEX quandary for me, which is probably why she really likes it. It's too much shape for how much it hooks, and it's an absurd amount of shape for how much it hooks. I've been talking the last couple of weeks about different cover stocks and cores and the combinations about that with that in my coffee streams.
Yeah,
the last couple of weeks.
You mean the roasting James streams, roasting coffee and roasting James? That's your new stream name.
That's what the But we've been talking about that kind of.
know what your new thumbnail next week's going to be.
Yeah, we can just put James on there.
No, that's 2 weeks, not this week.
Yeah, but we've been talking a lot about that stuff, and generally when you increase traction or increase hook, you're going to lose shape just because science.
Yeah.
I mean, if the ball's getting more traction earlier, the relationship between the ball and the lane is not going to change as much when it hits full dry as something more responsive that doesn't get nearly as much traction in the oil is going to change it. It's going to, something like the UC2 doesn't get near as much traction, and so when it hits dry, it's going to scream off the drive.
Yeah, it's like UC2 versus proton physics, for example.
Yeah, but for something like the parallax effect to get to hook that much and also boom that much, it's just all manner of way too much for me to even handle or think about. And so at that point, I have to just kind of flag it down the lane. Yeah. Plus, that shape doesn't necessarily fit that well. The UC2 is boomy, but it's still fairly round. The Idle Synergy is also boomy, but it's still fairly round. Plus, I don't have to fight it to get it down the lane. Parallax effect, I have to fight it to get it down the lane, and plus, if I back out of a little bit, it straightens out, which the UC2 does as well. You can control your shape with what if you want it to stop and straighten out, you can get it to do that.
Yeah.
But I have to straighten it out, or I have to flatten it out just to get it down the lane with the effect. And when I do that, it wants to straighten out and puke. And so now for Angel, it gives her traction to help the ball hook a little bit. Something like the UC2 can go a little bit too long and get flat. Well, the parallax effect will dig in and get more traction. Plus, it kind of has the friction response of the UC2 where it's very, very close. It's not too far behind it. And so it's something that works out a little bit better for her, especially on a fresh pattern.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just the general shape doesn't really work out that well. She likes hers a whole lot better than I like mine.
I think I'm going to try mine Friday, actually.
Yeah. Ooh, nice. I think that is just kind of bring it back full circle. Is you've been talking a lot about shapes and kind of how it impacts ball choices and ball shopping. I think that's a really good point. Is that, and I think this is part of why I opted to skip the effect. Is just seeing the shape, like seeing how much it hooked, how responsive it was, and kind of seeing how forward it can be when you have to back your hand out a little bit. That was kind of like okay, that it didn't look like something I would ever really get a whole lot of use out of. Comment from John in the chat. He took a quick look at the Supra today and said it just straight up puked down lane and didn't really do much of anything, and back to the bag after that with the Supra. So that's a good illustration of having different options, different situations. I think he said he used a shock and a recoil most of the day to control the friction a little bit more, but having those comfort shapes, I think, is something that a lot of people don't really understand. Sorry, I put us back in grid mode. Having those comfort shapes is number one, helpful for yourself just to kind of have that consistency of being able to have that more consistent benchmark of what the lanes were doing. Because I know that's something I struggled with for a long time was, especially, last summer into last fall, coming out of the COVID shutdowns, I bought and drilled way more bowling balls than I would care to admit, and I think I think I did get kind of caught. And I know you touched on this earlier as well, caught in a revolving door of I'm taking so many different balls week to week that it was almost difficult to get comfortable with anything and kind of figure out where I am, what I'm doing essentially. And it's just kind of, let's figure it out with this ball. If this doesn't work, then let's hope this other ball works, and yada yada yada. Versus actually having stuff that I know how it works, and being like, let's start with an all road, and if it feels a little lazy down lane, I probably need to throw my face too. And I have that everywhere I go because I always have those with me.
Could have been from COVID though. I mean, you were cooped up in the apartment, and then you had to buy a plane ticket to be able to bowl, so you just got to watch videos of everybody else throwing the cool balls.
No comment. Awful lot of love for the Zen around here. Yes, John, that's one that I wasn't actually. Sorry, say again, Luke.
No, I'm good.
I'm giving orders. Don't worry.
Okay. The Zen was one that I wasn't too sure about, honestly, initially, John. It was one where it looked like it could be pretty good, but I hadn't really seen a whole lot of it. And then I actually saw some other people because the Zen came out, I think in late November, early December, around the same time frame as the RST, the Proton, and the Synergy. So that was one where I was kind of like, this might look pretty good, but at the same time, it wasn't really in the forefront of my mind because I wasn't even allowed to throw global stuff until January 1st.
Yeah.
And then I started actually seeing some of them out in the wild, and getting that little layer of extra experience of talking to some people that had thrown it and figuring out how it works, in relation to stuff I have. And I'm like, okay, I need to actually give this ball a look. And now it's one that's fighting for a spot in my bag on a regular basis. So that's been kind of a story on my own of kind of figuring that out. John, I told you, yeah, whatever. Yes, Matt, Luke was on the way back from a tournament. I think they bowled in Belton at Aaron's Family Fun Center.
Yep.
Decent showing, not amazing, not terrible. Had a couple down games, but that's kind of how it goes, right, Luke?
Yeah, it was just it was a couple tricky pairs that I just didn't really.
Whoa.
Yeah. All the row.
The heckin' doggos.
I just didn't really adjust well enough well enough to the different pairs, but at the same time, Trevor was kind of slow on the trigger with those too, because they were just so different from what we bowled on to begin with. So
yeah, no, that makes sense.
So it was such a different experience that it just was a little tricky.
Yeah, which again, that's something that you kind of build up that library of knowledge over time. Even seeing the turn a couple times at Aaron's is, I know when we go to the low end, is probably ball down and move 10 left at this point. And I feel like next time we bowl there, I'm probably just going to do that blind when we make the turn.
And that's probably what I'm going to do too, at least. And like I said, on the left side of the lane, it's a whole lot clearer because the shot's fresh. So the differences or the lane, it's not transition. It's not, whoever was in front of us started off with this, with this crazy grid on this ball or whatever else. It's that it has to be the lane. And so going forward, it makes the decisions or the kind of ideas or what I'm noticing a lot clearer.
Yeah. It's kind of as you build that level of experience of kind of seeing what is happening and trusting what you're seeing, it makes the decision-making process a little bit simpler, I think.
Yeah.
So cool. Matt asked, how does it feel to be pro nice? I guess, like, how does it feel to be a professional bowler? Good question. If I ever get there, I'll let you know.
Yeah. So, Zach Wilkins he's been in the area here recently. He's a two-handed motive guy.
Oh, nice. Didn't know you were still around there.
Yeah, he bowled today and quite a few of the more recent ones. So.
Yeah, it's
He
the
made the top four today. But
nice.
and Dylan, it was kind of funny that Dylan had a couple down games when Trevor and I did too, because when we flipped to the low end of the house, like I said, he was plus 80 for the first two and then shot 170.
Yeah.
However, he figured it out, made an adjustment, and went 250, 260 the next two or something like that to put him right back up there. So
Yeah, and that's kind of what it's all about, is being able to pick yourself up from a bad game and get right back on it. And,
yeah.
what's done is done, and the only thing that matters is the next shot, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So, cool. I don't think there's anything else from Andrew I wanted to talk about. I think this has definitely been a really good conversation, just kind of about the kind of mindset shifts we've both been having, and I think kind of how that's manifesting in our own bowling. So, really appreciate you taking the time to come on over on my channel, Luke. Get a little bit of that Rosdahl juice to hopefully boost the subscriber count a little bit more. But
Yeah. Well, this is great for me too, because I didn't have to do any of the work setting it up.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
I can just show up and ramble about stuff for a little while, and it's all good. So.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this as well, but I will be back out in Kansas City, not next weekend, but the weekend after, which is St. Patrick's Day weekend. So I'll be flying out Friday morning first thing. I think Rise and Grinds will be a little delayed on Friday, but I will be making an appearance on that, where they can just roast me more than their coffee for probably an hour to an hour and a half. And then we got a couple tournaments that weekend.
Roast.
Super dark roast, like not my skin, but whatever. So I got a couple streams coming up then. So we'll have Rise and Grinds. I'll be subbing in League on Friday night with you guys, and then bowling at Ward Parkway for singles, which is going to hook off the planet no matter what pattern they put out, because Ward Parkway.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And then the weirdness of bowling at Olathe on Sunday.
It's just weird every time, and it doesn't make sense. I never developed any kind of relationship with that house on the right side of the lane, other than the low end hook, or the low end sucks.
That's
never really figured out a way around that, and I've only bowled there a couple times on the left side of the lane, and everything kind of holds true. So it's just the low end sucks, and there's nothing you can do about it. But,
this will be so a lot of what I've been working on being nicer to it, I think, has really solidified itself in probably the last 6 to 8 weeks. So this will be the first time that I'll have a chance. I'm bowling doubles with Riley Patton. And this will be the first time to really kind of put that to the test against one of the better righties that I know, who's really good at floating it like that.
Yeah.
And to be able to sit next to him and bowl 8 games together, and hopefully we'll be able to work a little better together, even just kind of seeing similar shapes.
That is a really good point, because that's kind of Riley's game is slow hooking it and really rolling it, and so that should be a really good gauge of where you're at. And even if you have a down game where you shoot like 180, 190 and feel pretty rough about it, if he's also shooting 180 or 190, that was kind of my barometer today, is that I shot big games in the area of the house that Trevor was shooting big games, and then as soon as it started sucking for him, it was sucking for me too, and then it went right back up at the same time. So even though I don't really feel that great about how I bowled, and even though he finished 60 pins higher than I did, 6 games, it was 10 pins a game, and he's just a better bowler than I am, plus more experienced, and plus he's on that side of the lane his whole life. And so it actually, in retrospect, it felt a whole lot. I feel a whole lot better about it now than it felt when I was in the middle of shooting 160 and 180 those 2 middle games. Which, I mean, he shot 170 and 190 or 2-0 those 2 games. So
it's interesting how a lot of bowling at higher levels is more about kind of being able to save yourself from a bad game, more so than being able to shoot a big game. Because if you can minimize the bad games, that's an easy way to bring up your average a little bit. And I know Matt Dunn mentioned in the chat he has a lot of problems adjusting, and that's kind of one of the big things is keep it simple and trust what your eyes are seeing. And if you can do that and get yourself a couple more makeable spares and make those spares, that's going to bring that saves a bad game in League from 160 to 190. That's 10 pins on your average for the week. Right there. And so it's a bunch of the little things that can make a big difference in the long run.
And the more you bowl, I think the more you can tell it's experience, and it's personal experience. You can't just go into something and have somebody else tell you the move at a Olathe East is always left.
I was about to say the same thing.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that personal experience is so good, but you have to make sure that you're good at reading what's going on, because if you're not reading what's going on right, all the experience in the world isn't going to help if you're reading it wrong and making the wrong decisions, the wrong adjustments. So you have to understand all the finer points about ball reaction and surfaces and lane play and layouts and whatever else, to make sure that you're reading what's going on right. And once you are reading what's going on right, or using it to kind of make the right decisions or the right adjustments, that's when it all kind of starts coming together. Because again, the first couple times you were out in Kansas City, it was pretty rough, and you were making moves based on your prior experience. But now having Kansas City experience and making the changes to your game, I think that these next couple times that you come out, you're going to have a different experience.
That's another interesting part of it, is I think the move set is a little more unified now, because with how I'm throwing it, my ball doesn't read the friction nearly as hard as it did before.
Yeah.
And so, that's why I struggled so much in Kansas City the first couple times, is everything hooks a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, what is all this friction? What am I supposed to do with this? I can't get my ball down the lane. Help.
And then when you have all that friction and then you lose back end motion like Lunar, then it's like, okay, well, the fronts are still hooking, but I'm not getting any response down lane. What in the actual heck do I do now?
My strategy was curl up in the corner and cry. So I'm not sure. I'm hoping to have a little bit better of an idea for Greater Kansas City Open next year. But
yeah,
we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But anyways, Luke, I do very much appreciate the time. Definitely looking forward to the streams over the next couple of weeks. And until then, good luck and good bowling.
Yep. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Peace.